Welcome back to the BFG by Roald Dahl. Today we're just going to read one chapter because tomorrow I've got two rather long chapters planned for you. So today we're going to start at chapter 8 and finish at chapter 8. So let's take a look at the BFG's diet, snozcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? There is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-funking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It's called the snozcumber. The snozcumber? Cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square teeth. Yesterday, he said, we were not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snozcumbers. Just because we happen to not actually be seeing something with our own two little winkles, we think it's not existing. But what about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humple crimp? What's that? Sophie said. And the rapsrackle? What's that? Sophie said. And the crumpscoddle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very well-known giant all myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool? Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but it was much, much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was as black as you can be, and white stripes were all along it. And it was covered all over with knobbles. Here is the repulsant snozcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squoggle it, I mispise it, I desponge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snozcumbers. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones? Sophie said. I know it's bones, said the BFG, but please understand that I cannot helping if it sometimes I is saying things a little bit squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools teaching me how to talk in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you was knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Whoever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snozcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG said. Giants appears. And that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now, how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I know is about myself is that I is very, very old, very, very old and crumply and perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes and quite suddenly a giant is disappearing and nobody has ever quite known where he's gone to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up and down, and the noise it made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthing, he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgusterous, the BFG gargled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozcumber. Ooh, no thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around for him here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you ipsy little winkle, have a little go. Sophie took a small nibble. She spluttered. Oh no, oh gosh, oh help! She spat it out quickly. It tastes of frog skin, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me it tastes of cockroaches and slime wanglers. Do we really have to eat it, Sophie said. You do, unless you was wanting to become so thin you'll be disappearing into a thick ear. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again the sad, winsome look came onto the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is such a twinkling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop scribbling. As I'm telling you before, I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always getting squaffled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, said the BFG. I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG suddenly, brightening up. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you's not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrump, said the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers. How absolutely squiffing. I is all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you just get some of those next time you're visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honourable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up rotsome snozzcumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you is only a tiny little girl. So that's chapter 8. Next time you hear from me, we'll be learning a little bit more about the different giants that live in giant country. Until then, take care.